In this session, we'll talk about Spring Data Comments. So what is Spring Data Comments? Well, the Spring Data JPA that we've been using so far in our applications is actually built on top of the functionalities provided by the Spring Data Comments. And as I mentioned in one of the previous sessions, that when we use Spring Data JPA, then the JPA repository is not the only repository that we get. We get a few other repositories as well that we could work with. And as we could see here, that the JPA repository that we have used so far in our applications, which our student repository also extended from, itself extends from the paging and sorting repository here, which actually is a part of the Spring Data Comments. So with Spring Data JPA, besides the JPA repository, we get these three repositories as well from the Spring Data Comments that we could work with. And out of the three repositories here, the first one, the repository interface at the top of the hierarchy here, is just a marker repository and doesn't have any methods declared in it. It's mainly used to capture the entity type that we want to create a repository for and the type of the ID attribute in that entity. And it also helps the string container to discover any concrete repository interface during the class path scanning. So this was how the string container got to know about our student repository interface. And then this CRUD repository here, as the name suggests, provides the CRUD methods. In fact, all the methods that we have used so far, the save method, find by ID, delete, and other methods, they all have been declared in this CRUD repository. So our student repository, which we made to extend from the JPA repository, if we had rather made it extend in the CRUD repository, even then everything would have worked just fine for us. So if your repository is doing just the CRUD related work, then you could choose to make it extend just from the CRUD repository. Just because you're using the Spring Data JPA doesn't mean that JPA repository is the only repository that you could work with. You could choose your concrete repository to extend from the repository that's more appropriate for you. You could even make your own custom repositories to extend from, in case you need to. But we don't want to complicate things here at the moment. We'll talk about that later. And then we have this paging and sorting repository, which has methods that are used to sort and paginate entities that are retrieved from the database. And then finally, we have our JPA repository, which besides extending from the paging and sorting repository, provides some extra JPA-specific methods as well. For example, using the explicit flush method call, you could flush all the pending updates in your persistence context to your database. And if you want to batch delete your entities, it has the support for that as well. It's quite easy to point out any batch-related methods, as they all end with an in batch suffix, as we could see here in the delete all in batch method. We look at the examples of some of the commonly used methods from these repositories later in the course. At the moment, we just want to talk about the Spring Data Comments. So that's about the repositories we get when we use Spring Data JPA in our application. Now, what if we are not using a relational database? What if we are working with a document database instead, MongoDB for example? Would we still be able to create repositories just like we created the student repository using Spring Data JPA? Well, the answer is yes. Just like the Spring Data JPA, which provides JPA persistence against a relational database, we have another project called Spring Data MongoDB, which provides persistence to a Mongo document database. And just like the Spring Data JPA, the Spring Data MongoDB is also built on top of the Spring Data Comments. And again, just like we get the JPA repository with Spring Data JPA, we get the Mongo repository with Spring Data MongoDB. which again, just like the JPA repository, also extends from the paging and sorting repository from the Spring Data Commons, as we could see here. The thing is that all the three projects here, the Spring Data Commons, the Spring Data JPA, and the Spring Data MongoDB, they all are the sub-projects of a larger umbrella project called Spring Data, whose main purpose is to provide a consistent data access programming model to all the relational and non-relational data stores while still retaining their special traits. The Spring Data JPA and the Spring Data MongoDB are the data store specific projects here, but they both share the functionalities provided in the Spring Data Commons. And that's how the Spring Data project tries to provide that consistent data access programming model to different type of data stores. Both the projects here, the Spring Data JPA and the Spring Data MongoDB, they both are sharing the repositories abstracted away in the Spring Data Commons. So once you get familiar with the Spring Data Commons and the methods declared in its repositories, whether you're working with Spring Data JPA or Spring Data MongoDB, you will not find them very different while working with them, and moving from one type of data store to another won't be too difficult either. So basically, the Spring Data Commons here provides an infrastructure of technology-neutral repositories that is shared by all the other data store specific Spring Data projects. And we've talked about just two of those projects here. If we go to the Spring.io's Spring Data Projects page, you will find that there are many such projects for different type of data stores, as we could see here. And they all share the Spring Data Commons project. With this Spring Data JDBC, you get the JDBC-based repositories for your relational database. And with Spring Data Redis, you get the support for your Redis key value database. All of these projects here are the sub-projects under the Spring Data project. You could take your time and read more about them if you're interested. We, however, will mainly be talking about Spring Data JPA in this course. And before I forget to mention it, Spring Data JPA, besides being built on top of the Spring Data Commons, of course is built using a JPA provider. And Spring Data JPA by default uses Hibernate for that. So that's about the basic overview of Spring Data Commons that I wanted to talk about in this session.